Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here at the Cryosphere Pavilion. My name is Ana Gomes, and I work at CIIMAR, which is the Interdisciplinary Center for Marine and Environmental Research in Portugal. First of all, I would like to thank ICCI for the opportunity to share a little bit of my research and what I do. And I titled my presentation The Eden Arctic, and that's because I work as a marine microbiologist in the Arctic. And today my main goal is to highlight how this tiny fraction maintains the health and the balance of the entire ecosystems. So the project that I'm currently involved in is called Nitro on Ice, and it's a project related with the nitrogen cycle in the Arctic. We just started this project, so at the moment we don't have numbers or data yet. So instead, I decided to divide my presentation in two parts. And in the first part, I would like to share a little bit about my experience with fieldwork in the Arctic. And honestly, it's just an opportunity to show how beautiful the Arctic is and the environment that we so strongly want to protect. So yeah, I will be sharing what we do during fieldwork. Maybe for this room, it's not something new. Yeah, so this year I had the opportunity to go for the first time to the Arctic, the first time on a cruise to the Arctic Ocean, and the second time to the research station in New Ellison in Svalbard. Then in the second part of the presentation, I will, of course, talk about the project itself, and what we want to accomplish. And yeah, so just to give you a background on my research path and basically what got me here, my background is actually in biochemistry, and I was working with the fruit fly in the University of Stockholm. Then I completely changed my research interests and I decided to pursue a master's degree in marine biology. And I was doing my master's thesis in the Arctic Research Center in Denmark. And it was here that I was introduced for the first time to Arctic marine bacteria. And at the time, I was working with bacteria that are capable of degrading petroleum in Greenlandic seawater. Then after finishing my thesis, I found my current supervisor at CIIMAR. And since then, I have been working in climate-related projects and how climate change is impacting microbial communities in the Arctic. So I will start with the Arctic Ocean cruise. And our original transect was in the Nansen Basin, which is one of the Arctic's central ocean basins. And this was an excellent opportunity to sample this very specific area because we don't have a lot of data in the central Arctic Ocean. But very unfortunately, we were not able to reach the Nansen Basin, and that's because the ice conditions around Svalbard didn't allow us to go further north. So instead, we decided to reroute and sample the Fram Strait, which is between Svalbard and Greenland. So yeah, our journey started with the Norwegian icebreaker, the Kronprinshaken, and these research vessels have basically everything you can imagine, like a sauna, a tanning bed, a gym, everything you need in the middle of the Arctic Ocean. And yeah, during the first day of traveling, we arrived at the ice edge. And for me, it was very fascinating to see for the first time where the open ocean and the floating ice actually meet and what the Arctic Ocean really is, basically. And yeah, of course, as soon as we get into the ice edge, we started seeing these, and it was very exciting because, as you might know, there's only one animal that leaves these footprints. Yeah, so during our cruise, we have pelagic stations, which is where we sample seawater. And here you can see some of the nets that were being used to by another group to collect microplastics in the surface of the seawater. But I was actually working in the moon pool, which is like a hole that opens up in the middle of the boat. And then the CTD, which is the device in the second picture, basically goes down to the bottom of the ocean and it collects seawater at various depths. And yeah, we also have ice stations where you actually go on the ice. And we were doing all kinds of ice work and drilling and collecting the ice cores. So during our ice stations, we have people on board watching for polar bears. And we also have people that go on the ice with safety guns and rifles for polar bear protection. And as you can see, this station is very nice. You can see everything. If something came up, you have enough time to communicate. But you also have these types of ice stations. I don't know if you can tell, but these ice ridges, they are very tall. And me personally, I was very stressed because you can never tell if something is coming like behind or coming closer. So, okay, yeah. So these are just some pictures of the work we were doing on ice. So we drill the ice, we cut the ice into different sections because we are interested in looking at bacteria in the different parts of the ice cores. And we were also collecting seawater manually from under the sea ice. And yeah, this is our setup on board. And we have containers which have melted ice cores and seawater. And all of the work we do is just filter this water into, I don't know if you can see, but there are small filters in the end of the tubes, and bacteria get retained there. And that's the only thing we analyze when we get back. So yeah, as you can imagine, there's not that much to do in the middle of the Arctic Ocean. Maybe go to the gym, look outside. So sometimes we decided to do some yoga in the heliports, catch some sun rays, very important. So yeah, I think you get really creative when you are in the middle of nowhere with strangers. I mean, yeah, and in the last days of our cruise, we actually got a visitor, and he got very close to our boat, and he decided to play with our ice anchor, with our equipment. But I think he didn't damage anything, so it was actually a very beautiful and powerful encounter. And yeah, with that, we returned to Svalbard. Everything went really well, even though we had to completely change our sampling plan. And now we are on the process of analyzing our samples. 2 weeks later, I returned back to Svalbard, this time to the research station in New Allison. And just in the previous presentation, Ugo was saying that this is a very unique place, and it truly is. And our lab is the only one where you have to cross the Arctic terns territory, and in July they have babies, so they get very aggressive. So it was not a very fun part of the day every time you have to go to the lab or you forgot something, because they attack you. So yeah. And in New Allison, I was basically doing the same type of work, so collecting seawater. This time I was not collecting ice cores. But this project is actually very interesting because it's in collaboration with the Norwegian Polar Institute. And they have been collecting data from this specific area for, I think, at least 10 years now. So they have a very large and complete data set about many things besides bacteria. So yeah, so now a little bit about the project itself. As I mentioned, we work with bacteria, and they are the basis of the food webs. So this is because they supply the nutrients to the phytoplankton, and of course, phytoplankton then gets eaten by zooplankton. Then, okay, some things are missing, but it's okay. Then zooplankton by fish, and so on and so on. So yeah, bacteria. Without bacteria, there's nothing else, because they mediate these biogeochemical cycles, and they control the nutrient pools that are available for every other organism. So, okay, this one is, it's okay. So, as you certainly know, the Arctic is being disproportionately affected in terms of the climate impacts of greenhouse gases emissions. And we always hear about 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius. And although that doesn't seem like that much, warming ecosystems are very much like when a human has a fever, and it doesn't take that much to completely disrupt the entire system, which is what is happening in the Arctic. And this is a very complex graph, and it doesn't have the right labels, but basically a lot of things are going on, multiple perturbations. So yeah. Here I have represented the impacts specifically in the oceans. And in the oceans, what we are observing is the warming of the waters and increased acidification, because the oceans are taking up more heat and carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Of course, the most noticeable change is the melting of sea ice, which leads to stratification, and stratification prevents nutrients from being mixed to surface layers of the ocean. Another impact of sea ice loss is that the light is penetrating further into the water column. And since more light is available to phytoplankton, we are observing an increase in phytoplankton blooms. So yeah, these dynamics are completely changing. Another consequence of climate change is that warmer waters are intruding into the Arctic, and they are transporting, of course, heat and organisms from the lower latitudes into the high latitudes. And lastly, we are observing increased inputs from glaciers and rivers, which supply the oceans with nutrients and organic matter. So these dynamics are changing quite a lot, and with a lot of consequences for the biological part of the ecosystems. So as I also said, we work with the nitrogen cycle, and you might be wondering, what is even that? Why is that even important? But to explain things very simply, organisms like phytoplankton, they require nutrients to grow. So they require carbon, which is in abundance in seawater, but they also require other nutrients, such as nitrogen, which is often limiting in the marine environments. So if nitrogen is limiting, basically nitrogen controls the amount of productivity the ecosystems have. There are also other nutrients, such as iron, but these are required in much less quantities, and they can also be limiting. And as you can imagine, this is where the nitrogen cycle comes into play, and the image was supposed to be the reactions, but I was not going to go into detail on the specific reactions. Basically, what you need to know is that the nitrogen cycle is a somewhat complex process with a lot of reactions, and we have nitrogen in various forms and oxidation states, and microorganisms are the ones that mediate all of these reactions and transform the nitrogen. And of course, by doing that, they change the nutrient pools that are available for every other organism, including fish, and of course, this impacts also fisheries. Okay, it's not changed. Okay. Yeah, so here I have represented again the nitrogen cycle in red, and it's a bit more simplified. And what you need to know is that the nitrogen cycle can increase or decrease the amount of nitrogen that is available for the organisms. And the interactions between all of these reactions maintains the balance of the ecosystems. Okay. So phytoplankton fixes carbon dioxide, which of course dissolves from the atmosphere to the ocean. And when it's doing that, it's also taking up nitrogen, and this creates biomass. And this biomass can then get transported into the bottom layers of the ocean. And this biomass contains both carbon and nitrogen. So this is a process called the biological carbon pump. And it's inevitably linked to the nitrogen cycle because the nitrogen cycle controls the amount of biomass that is produced. So yeah, the biological carbon pump is responsible for removing carbon dioxide from the surface layers of the ocean into the deep layers of the ocean, where the carbon can get sequestered for a very long time. And so basically, it's a natural process of mitigating climate change. Currently, we don't know if, there's a lot of debate on whether the nitrogen cycle is in balance, and that's because the amount of nitrogen that we have calculated and predicted that is entering the systems is lower than the amount that is leaving the systems. So this means that we are losing nitrogen over time. And of course, this has consequences for marine productivity and the biological carbon pump. There is okay. There is a challenge with these predictions, and that's because there are large portions of the ocean that remain undersampled and for which we don't know the magnitude and the extent of the nitrogen cycling reactions. And for a very long time, the Arctic did not receive any attention in terms of the nitrogen cycle because the reactions were assumed to be lower in magnitude compared to the lower latitude regions. And this has been changing over the past few years, but it's a very recent, research. So yeah, now we are trying to increase the number of studies on the Arctic to also better estimate the contribution of the Arctic for the global nitrogen budget. Yeah, so we are currently working on a review paper to elucidate where research on the nitrogen cycle should be directed towards, and also which regions should receive more attention. And the goal is to increase the number of measurements in the Arctic, also identify which organisms are responsible for these reactions, and by knowing that, we can also better predict the future and the trajectory of the nitrogen cycle. So yeah, just to finish my presentation, I would just like to present what we might expect to see in terms of the cycle in the Arctic. And actually, we predict that the amount of nitrogen that is increasing, meaning entering the systems, is going to increase. And that's because the organisms that mediate these reactions, they actually prefer warmer waters, and they are also being transported from the lower latitudes into the high latitudes. At the same time, we also see an increase in the processes that remove nitrogen from the systems. And that's because these reactions are promoted under low oxygen conditions and with high organic matter, which are conditions that are expanding in the oceans. There are other processes that might be negatively impacted, and that's because they are inhibited by light. So basically, and to summarize everything, we actually don't know what is going to happen because we don't know the balance between these reactions. So we don't know if the reactions that increase the nitrogen surpass the ones that decrease the amount of nitrogen. But in any case, if we see a decrease of nitrogen in the marine environment in the Arctic, we expect to see a decrease in productivity and also in the amount of carbon that can be removed from the atmosphere. And of course, this has large implications for marine life and also for ecosystem services that we need, such as fisheries. So, yeah, thank you. Yes.
So why was it expected that the Arctic and Antarctic nitrogen cycle would be so different? So that this is the introduction of like
Yeah. No, it's because I think it's just research bias, but anyway, it's because um, the 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 process, like the Arctic has very harsh conditions and very low temperatures, and also a lot of dark environments, which were assumed to be conditions that did not support the microorganisms that do these reactions in the low latitudes. But this was based on the knowledge we have from the low latitudes. And this has been changing because we are realizing now that we have other organisms in the Arctic with different physiologies. So basically, that's what happened. But yeah, the reactions do happen in the Arctic and in similar magnitude. So we are just now realizing this and putting more efforts in the yeah.